Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today. My name's Sonali and I'll be your host. Please note that we can't hear you as you're on mute. If you do have any questions during the presentation, please use the chat window. We're going to be addressing those questions during the open Q&A session at the very end. So without further ado, let's begin with an introduction of today's speaker. Gary Steer, would you like to start?
Sure. Good morning or good afternoon, depending upon where you're located. So my name is Gary Steer. I've been with GSX for 4 months now, maybe 5. I am the Vice President of the Americas. I'm also a Microsoft MVP and what they used to call an Exchange Ranger or a Microsoft Certified Solutions Master. So lots of Microsoft background and technology in there. And I'm here today with Olivier. And Olivier, go ahead and...
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. So my name is Olivier Reynaud. I'm based out in Boston. I'm a technical sales manager and certified on Microsoft and Office 365. And well, glad to be here today to show you some of our work on the Outlook actions and performance.
So I think as we get into this, just a quick note on the format. This is different than a product type webinar. We're not really focusing on a product, although all of the data that we have, it was gathered by our products, but we did the analysis, as you'll see as we go forward for today in Power BI. So we're not going to spend much time in PowerPoint. It's really meant to be just an easy flowing format. I think you'll find as we go through it, there's a lot of great information that's buried in here. We literally have been gathering data for weeks, and we're up, still working, playing with Power BI until, the late last night, and because it was fun, not because we had to. So we really, there's so much that we can talk about, so many different things that we see, that for today's focus, we chose to take a look at the impact of individual Outlook actions. And we're going to run through here in a second the different scenarios. Just in the essence of time, we will actually come back around and, for future technical webinars, we're going to, do more detailed analysis on looking at, troublesome hops. One I'm actually really excited about, what exactly is ExpressRoute going to get you in terms of the performance, the detail and metrics that you're looking at going to the cloud. Different Outlook protocol impacts. So, map you over HTTP, RPC, EWS, and we have the ability to do more than just email. So we have this data that we're going to go through today on a lot of other protocols to and from 365. But today's theme, as I mentioned, we're looking at the Outlook actions.
Yeah, and so some of you might have seen that in previous webinars. So yes, we decided to focus on each of the actions because, so yes, you probably all know, most of you probably are already on the cloud or at least trialing Office 365, have a POC here and there or a few users. And yes, the messaging service is slower than Office 365. Like Microsoft did an amazing job on security, high availability. Performance is probably the last of those topics. So it is something to be careful on and to look at. And what we've noticed, and this is what you can see here in the graph, this is one of the migration that we helped out for a large organization in North America, and that's the graph you see on the right compares the on-premises messaging service as opposed to the Office 365. And as you can see, for each action we have huge difference in terms of how long it takes to open the mailbox, create a meeting, so any of those actions that an end user can perform in the Outlook client. So each of those actions matters, and that's why we today the data that we're looking at, we've been studying this data on all of those different actions, and we've selected a few to go through today. It's very important because so not only you see large differences, but for each of those actions, there are different user thresholds depending on what the actual end users are used to, depending where they're located, what the service used to be for them. So it's very important to know and to have facts and metrics for each of those actions. So that's what we're going to be looking at today in order for you to understand when those tickets come in to help desk, escalate to your team, and if you don't have any metrics, it's hard to understand what's going on. So in what we're going to show you today, and don't worry, this is probably the last slide. Here's what we've done. So we focused on three main areas. So the first one is the impact of geo-access to Office 365. So in everything we'll show you today, we actually have used two different tenants, one used in Europe, one used in US, North America. And we have different end users location where we deployed some robot users to gather those metrics. And we had some in US, in Europe, and in APAC.
And then the goal, if you're not familiar with this, when you configure Outlook, or when Outlook configures itself anymore is probably the proper term, you connect to Outlook.office365.com. That name is actually redirected to something close to you. So if you boot up your laptop when you're in, Boston, you're going to get one connection point that is actually different than when I fly, 300 miles back home to Philadelphia. I get a different connection point. You take it to Europe, you have another connection point. Microsoft tries to get you onto their backbone as quickly as they possibly can, and I think actually when we get into this data, there's some interesting things that we found as we look through it. The tenant-wide issues, there's some things we can show you. I think there are some nice global trends to see. And then the last one on the network impact, things that can go wrong. We did some really cool stuff here. We can start diving into some of the data first, but some of I think my favorite things that we've come across and that we've seen come down to these different network impacts. It's surprising what you might think is a problem and what is really a problem.
And all those have been driven by actual customer feedback, issues we've seen on specific clients. So yeah, so let's jump into the demo. So. I saw one question happen to pop through. The connection speeds, someone asked what the connection speeds are. They actually vary between our different locations. We can get exact, and I can tell you out of Philadelphia, it's on 100 meg fiber up and down. When we see Boston, it's not nearly as pleasant or nice to deal with. We'd want to get the speeds on a few of the other locations so that you have them, but we ran the same tests out of the really out of the same location. So in this first Power BI screen we've got, when we talk about open mailbox, you'll notice you actually have several running out of Boston, several running out of Bangalore, several running out of Philly. Every single one of those is designed to show what the impact is of that particular connection type. And as for the specific question on is this in cache mode or online, everything we're doing would simulate an online mode because we're looking to determine the impact of the network itself. When we get into cache mode, it becomes a slightly different discussion of how fast is the machine, how fast is the disk drive that is SSD, not SSD. I mean, how much data do we have cached? So all of our testing is run purely in online mode. It's not run in cached mode. Mm-hmm. Indeed. So what we've used today for what you're seeing right now, some of you must be familiar with it. It's Power BI. So we've extracted all the data in there and built some dashboards to look through different actions. And here you can see the different locations and different configurations that we have run. So first thing we wanted to go through was the tenant-wide issues, or what you can see as a global trend. So one thing we haven't mentioned that is important to notice as well is that we do have a robot user sitting in Azure, so kind of doing all the tests as close as possible from the Office 365 tenants. So here we can see all the different what we call robot users, so all the different metrics from the different locations with the different configurations. So just to recap, but we'll explain that more in depth, but we have one from Azure, two running from Bangalore, one hitting US, one hitting EU, same for Boston, Nice, and Philly. And then we have some different network configurations that we'll go through later. I mean, first thing to notice, I guess, is the global trend here. So when we looked at that, so obviously you can see on the weekend it's much more quiet. There is more traffic on weekdays. Starting here is Monday, so you can see this go up. Not necessarily going to generate tickets. I mean, it's something that everybody can expect going over. It's more like some specific ones might have particular issues. So maybe we can remove the one that have actual network impacts. So those two will go back later. And here, I mean, it's pretty stable, right? So, except specific peaks here and there. You can see some of them are even in Asia is impacted.
One thing, I'm not sure how much people on the call happen to know about, statistics or averages, standard deviations, but when you look at your median access time, and we have this up all the time, but you'll notice, so we just pulled out the two that we have intentionally done very, very bad things to. Well, I know you laugh, but we think we had a ton of fun with this. But if you look on average, the standard deviation is not too far off of really where the median is. So we got a pretty good performance rhythm. And when I look at this graph, I mean, I swear it's kind of like I watched The Matrix too many times or something, but you get to know what the standard flow looks like out of Office 365. Yes, I've got isolated peaks. But if I'm not seeing multiple locations peaking at the same time, it's probably not something tenant-wide. It could have just been a blip on the network, could have been anything. But in general, you'll notice that largely we have a pretty systematic or pretty regular behavior that we see here. We picked a counter on opening mailbox times in the bottom right corner. Honestly, over 5 seconds, this is the one that there's the most tolerance. Somebody opens Outlook, they walk away, they get a cup of coffee, it's Monday morning. They're less likely to realize this than they are some of the other issues that we're going to get into as we move along here. But in general, we kind of just picked a marker, and we've got just a wide array of different connections, but like I said, in general, it's rhythmic. It's relatively straightforward, and you don't see a whole lot of change to it, minus these, the huge peaks, which we did not take the time to pull out. Obviously, some of which, I mean, a 50 or 48 second, time to open the mailbox, something terrible happened there, but it's a one-off. I mean, it's a single data point that happened to take place. Anything else on this one, or
No. I think as you can see, like the open mailbox, great metric to have, but it's not enough. You need visibility on the other actions. So we can take a look at the create meeting. It'll take a bit of time to load. Here we are. So here we have different locations. We removed the one that have network issues. So those are just different locations accessing. Same thing here. Like we can see some specific peaks. So there are some moments where you see the entire tenant being impacted by some issues. So here we can see everything impacted, including Azure here and there. So those things, it means, yes, this is something that your tenant is impacted with. It's at Microsoft, if you have all those different metrics. And so this allows you to understand where the issue is.
And you'll notice too, I mean, just talking about impact, and as we go through, some of these have much even more clear focus on what's actually happening. But if I look over the weekend, the 18th, 17th, it's relatively calm. But you can see, the 19th into the 20th, we've got the data picks up some, and we can focus and zoom in more on these, as we get through, depending upon how much time we have. But overall, you'll see when you look at these that the tenants tend to have a reasonable, performance to them that works whether you're coming from, Boston or Nice or Bangalore or Azure in this particular workload set that we have.
Mm-hmm. And I think we can transition to the geo access from here, because so here we have different locations, as you can see. So not huge differences, but here it's really just a meeting with one person. So if you compare that and somebody that would create a new meeting invitation with 10 different people from his team, you can definitely multiply the impact. What we can see here is the longest one is the one from India that's actually accessing Europe, and then we have the one in Boston, and obviously it takes longer to access from US to Europe than to access a European tenant.
And that's, yeah, so I think it's a good thing to point out there. So if we focus on just the two Boston ones here, just show just the two balls. Yeah, there we go. Overall, so when we look at these, the first one is actually the Boston location. This is the same system. It's running two different tests, but our goal really is to help show where what happens and what goes on with geographic access. Both mailboxes. So for people who are really focused on the data, both unused mailboxes, no one else on them. Trial tenants that don't have heavy activity on them. All by design. It's really here to make this simpler to see. But if you look, you can see that when Boston is accessing a European-based tenant, it takes longer than it does coming out of the U.S.-based tenant. I mean, we're coming at an average access time for creating a meeting of 450 milliseconds versus about 380. So we're picking up 20% latency there just because I came onto a U.S. entry point, and then from the U.S. entry point, I then have to traverse across Microsoft's network back over to where that mailbox is located.
Mm-hmm. And I think we should look at the other actions because we've seen when we were analyzing the data much more impacts on actions like FreeBSD, download attachment. So if you're looking at... Oh,
hang on, before we leave here, yep. And I do this to Olivier all the time, so I apologize. But
I'm used to it.
So right here, if you look on June 16th into the 17th, look at the number of colors that have spiked right here in these same time frames. So I think one of the biggest questions we get from our customers is, when we're looking at this data, when we're analyzing, how do we know when we have a problem? How do we know that something is wrong with our tenant versus a single network location? And we're going to get into the single network location stuff in a bit. It's amazing what you can break when you actually try to break it. But looking at here where I've got multiple robots all spiking at the same time with problems on the same workload, you're not in a situation where it's your environment more likely. It's more likely that in this particular time we're coming up against something that is sitting in Microsoft's environment, and some of those. This one here was is even out of Azure. You can see by color, it's in here as well. So when I've got I probably don't know if I can get my mouse on it, but anyway, but again you can tell by the color coding. Even coming out of Azure, we're seeing these tremendous spikes at the same time. It's a short time window. I'm not, believe me, I like Office 365. I think the cloud is great. I think you'll see as we continue to go through this that the impact of other things is really strong. But when you're looking for correlation, when you've got the data from 6, 7, 8 different sites, and you can see that they're all having trouble, including something inside of Azure, it may be time to actually, open that ticket and ask a question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so a few things to call out on GeoAccess. So we've had many customers experiencing different issues on that because, so as you said, and you can actually, I was thinking that earlier, if you just ping from whatever location, if you've never done it before, if you ping outlook.office365.com, you will actually see it resolve to your local region with a specific name into it, like North America, EMEA, APAC, and so on. So here again, we see impacts of where you exit and the different, where the location is and the tenants. And we've seen numerous issues. I mean, one of them is just connecting through VPN, depending on the protocol and the settings, especially the gateway settings of the VPN. You might actually, once you're connected to VPN, just exit from Europe, even though you're connecting from US. That's something very common we've seen that is going to have a big impact because you're really just bouncing off from another location. And I think Gary, you do.
DNS
too.
I had a customer years ago that actually. So I knew GSX long before I came here, and this particular company is still a GSX customer that I used the product at many years ago. But we had an issue where Europe was seeing horrific access times to Office 365, and again, the Microsoft has evolved tremendously in the last 4 years. So the access time now we're seeing, yes, we see a variance, but it's not tremendous. I mean, I would never use that statement anymore. It's just an impact. However, this particular location we've never seen anything like it. The performance was unbelievable. I mean, it was just terribly bad. And as we started digging in and started doing really advanced, analysis of where the data was going, where it was leaving the network, how it was getting onto Microsoft's backbone, we started to realize it wasn't hitting the European access point. It was actually coming across to the U.S. before it bothered to get onto Microsoft's backbone. Specifically, it was going into the northwest of the United States. So as we did some digging, we found out that he had his internal DNS pointing to Google's DNS, because Google is the best in the world. Which, out of Europe gave him he used a Google DNS based out of, the Pacific Northwest region, more California region, but he got, U.S. West Coast based results, and all of the clients were traversing to the U.S. West Coast just to get onto the tenant to come back to try to get their mail. It's an incredible impact that it had, and in their case, it was really crippling. It was just disturbing how much of an impact something that simple could have when you actually watch what it does and what can go wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so definitely something to watch out and to have metrics on, because to troubleshoot those issues is not very easy. Should we go to the network impacts?
Yes, let's do some fun stuff here. So, I think when we look at what's happening here. So let's explain what we did. We've got two machines that we, for fun, set up here. One of them has and this is the one that's in Nice, it's showing up as blue. This one has a consistent 30% packet loss. The other machine that we have in here has a router that, and this is actually a real customer came to us with this, but it has a router that is effectively flapping. It's dropping, in this particular case, we're dropping an internal network card for, a second at a time, and then leaving it up for a period of time and then dropping it again. So we've got a 30% packet loss compared to, roughly an 8% packet loss. When you see 30% packet loss, people will get very worried very quickly.
The network team will scream.
and yes, and they're looking at that. But when you see an 8% packet loss across the WAN, you're looking more at your network. You're looking to see more what's going wrong, what may have happened there. I think when we look at these two, not surprisingly, but barely, the Nice system is a little slower. But for a 30% to 9% packet loss, that should be a lot different than it is. However, I think that one of the things that we saw when you're trying to look up FreeBusy on someone, and you have to think in too, how do people do this? So do I put everyone in the two line, then switch to the meeting screen to see their availability, or do I go into that availability screen and line by line add a new person? Maybe think about someone new to add, which could actually cause multiple, availability calls to have to get made to bring this data back. Mm-hmm. Am I jumping around on dates and times? There's a lot that could even amplify this situation. But, if you're waiting, 5 seconds for an availability call to come back, people are not happy. And when we go in and we take a look at the impact here, with a 30%, outage, we're looking at 102 availability calls that went over 5 seconds. You'd probably expect that you'd generate those 102 tickets when people are consistently seeing problems like that. I think the interesting thing to me though is here's what happens when you have something like it maybe a little more subtle. The network team would not at all be jumping up and down the way that they would when they see an 8-9% packet loss. But if you look at this, we generate more tickets. So I'm talking about generating, with a 30% data loss, I generate 102 tickets. When I, have a router that is down, 1 second out of every 8-9 seconds, I'm generating 140 tickets. Outlook has really learned to be better about, seeing, data packet loss. TCP cures a lot of evils, but when it drops the connections like this, you're going to pick up a lot of tickets. And this particular, example that we're referencing, it was a similar situation. It was hard to identify because it didn't look like this kind of a problem, but yet it generated a massive number of tickets. And kind of like I say too, with the whole, I know what the data looks like. This is not healthy. The second, when we first graphed this out and I saw this, my first response was, whoa, it's not healthy. Right away,
that's actually where it started, actually.
Yes.
Before the thing wasn't happening.
Yeah. So you can tell, a couple of blips, but here's when we turned it on. You can see when this took place, but it's not, it's easy to identify when something is terribly wrong.
Yeah, and if we focus on the actual data, I think the gap is even stronger.
Yeah.
We have pretty much 50% more.
Olivier just zoomed it into when the actual problem was in place, and if you notice, if you look at the access time, the average access time now, once we've zoomed into where we actually had the source problem, it's worse. I mean, we're coming in at a 2.2 second average versus a 1.65, but the actual, the impact that generates things that cause user tickets is 97 to 132. It's, I think to me, when we look at this kind of data, it's what we know to be true. You can't just look at an environment and say, oh, here's what's going to go wrong. No, you actually have to know what's going wrong. You have to see it. And like I said, I mean, I know we're just maybe a little too geeky here, but the first time we did this, we saw these results. Even last night, we were clicking around, going through the results. Every time we sit down and look at these, the fact that something that should be 1/3 the impact has such a variance is, I don't know, I guess I like my job too much, but it's just the kind of thing that we always, happen to see.
Mm-hmm. So maybe we can go on the other example, then we'll probably be running out of time, but so we did the same experiment with the download attachments. So actually, downloading emails with attachment to it, document, anything, Word document, and downloading that to the actual clients. And we can definitely see same type of issues. So if we go back with the Philly one, here we are, and actually here it's even bigger. We're on the same date. You can see the access time overall is 10 seconds to download attachments in Nice, 5 seconds here in Philly. But the tickets are still much bigger with the one that's flapping. So much more often, end users are going to have issues that kind of exceed their personal threshold. The threshold where they starts to complain. They're going to either change their habits, not going to look at the free busy status of the other attendees. Nobody wants that, or they're going to open support tickets, help desk tickets that help desk. What are going to do with it? Escalate to your team, and then you need to have facts like that to understand what's going on. I know it took that customer so long to understand what the issue was. So we're almost out of
So
time.
let's I want to make sure that we jump back over to the create meeting, because I mean, some of these things I think really help show what tends to go wrong and what doesn't. But when we as we focus on Boston, for a create meeting in this particular zoom in, but again, when I see things like the standard deviation, even if I put all of the other locations back in, I'm going to end up in a situation where I've got a standard deviation that's below really our median access time, and it's a nice, again, nice structure of the data. You can see it picks up during weekdays. It's no surprise, but that standard deviation is completely blown out of the water when we turn around and we put, that Nice robot back in. It's incredible just how much worse that is than anything else, and in particular, this one, it's median, so that's, half the ones are above that, half the ones are below that. In terms of the counters, we have 610 milliseconds, so 0.61 seconds, but look at the standard deviation. I mean, so really, we're talking about just a tremendous variance of what it could take to, or what the impact here is, and I think how unreliable, in my, the way I'd kind of phrase it, but how unreliable both the median and your average are. It just shows you just how much is wrong when the standard deviations get that far out of alignment. You start to see that the data is going to be, well, just going to show us that we have a tremendous issue. I think the other thing too, just trying to make sure that we show some the things that we actually found out to be really interesting, but When we look at, I think, putting everybody back in, the one scenario we didn't talk about just yet because we were focusing on the fun things we broke. Come on, there we go. I unclicked it. One more time, one more time. There we go, got it. When we look at, these are all of our locations, but when we have all the information in, so we have this is the one that's broken. Obviously, we expect it to perform poorly. Again, here's our next broken one. We expect it to perform poorly. But when we look at who's in the number 3 position, I actually have a robot user going from, Philadelphia just back to Europe on a free busy lookup, coming in a worse position than who's in number 4, I believe, is Bangalore. So, when we look at these and we look to see in terms of, what's taking the longest time, what's performing poorly, we actually see that, the impact of going geographical for some workloads is much stronger than other workloads. So in this case, like I said, geographic in that for FreeBusy in this case causes a lot more of an impact than it does in some of the other workloads. Even though one other just interesting note we saw. If we look at our 2 Bangalore locations that we've got in here. So Bangalore accessing Europe has an average access time of 0.82 in this scenario that we have in place. So when we come back in and we look at which one is, that's Boston. Which one is
here?
Okay,
26.
Okay, but and keep in mind, lower is better here. So when I'm looking at the data, one thing we actually saw consistently, just an interesting trend that we didn't take too much time to dig in on, but when we look through this data and then the information that was in there, we actually found that out of Bangalore, so out of a robot we had in India, we got better access time back to the United States than we did to Europe consistently across all the different protocols that we looked at. The percentage of variance, was slightly had slight peaks and valleys, but overall, we just happened to see that Bangalore did better connecting to a U.S. tenant, which you might think it's not that we're not that close to it, but Europe's closer than we are, I guess is what I'm trying to say. However, it's interesting that you don't really know how the backbone's going to perform. You don't really know what workloads may have to be sent back to the U.S., which ones are filled out of Europe. It's really interesting as we dig into each and every one of these what was actually going on and taking place in the background.
Mm-hmm. So I think we already went a bit over time, so maybe we can move to questions before the end.
Yeah, we've got plenty to talk about. So if you'd like to have more questions on data, let us know. We can certainly keep going on it for I think far too much time. But yeah, so I think we can probably jump in on the questions that we've gotten in.
Okay. Thank you for that, Gary and Olivier. So the Q&A session, we're trying to collect the questions here. Here's one. Can you tell us exactly how the data was gathered?
Yes, definitely. We briefly explained at the beginning, but we haven't gone too much into details. So we had actual robot users in each of those locations at each of those different layers that we had, so behind the proxy, in front of the proxy, in Asia, and so on. And those robot users are really making the calls, so using the same DLL that Outlook have to make those calls to Office 365. We used actual mailboxes with a normal license to get Exchange Online to gather each of those different metrics. We gathered that for days. We imported all the data in Power BI. Had a lot of fun with that, and yeah, I mean, so really as close as it can be to the actual Outlook client.
All right, hang on. I've got to jump in on one thing, Olivier. I apologize. But I knew I wanted to find this, and here it is. But so this one robot right here, because you mentioned authenticated proxy, and then we'll get back to the rest of the questions here. Yep. Yeah. But so the authenticated proxy here, literally, it's a proxy server. It just requires the client to authenticate. If you notice, I mean, it's coming in at 660 milliseconds on average in this scenario. But the important thing here to pay attention to is this is an authenticated proxy that actually performs worse than accessing your mailbox out of India. That, when I look at these things, people, many of my customers have network equipment that actually, we've got somebody we were just talking to who came back and said, by the way, we've got 3 unsupported different proxy configurations. I don't even know how to respond to that. I mean, it's a very, very not great starting point. Really, I mean, that's a very long discussion. However, the fact that I can actually put a proxy in and make it worse performance than coming from the other side of the world, that's something that every company needs to pay very close attention to as you're making these decisions to go to the cloud and to put network equipment in place that is impacting this your actual data to and from the cloud. You really have to just focus on it, and you have to understand what it's going to do. I forced authentication on everything across the board to kind of show the worst case scenario. Maybe there's a middle ground that's better here, but it doesn't much matter. What does matter is really what happens here when you put that piece of equipment in place.
Mm-hmm. Oh, good collab. So I hope that answers the question. Do you want to take the next question?
Sure. The next question I have here is, tell me about your robot user. Is it controlling an Outlook client?
That's it. So yes and no. It depends upon the protocol you pick. So for something like EWS, when we're simulating effectively a Mac Outlook client, we don't need to call any DLLs natively. Well, I mean, we call EWS APIs, but we don't actually have to call an Outlook client. But when we do our other protocols, so we do RPC over HTTPS or RPC over HTTPS, we're not launching a client and clicking buttons. However, we are using the Outlook client install and its DLLs, because what we want to do is make sure that you can put that system into your patch cycle so that out of this office, it is literally exactly like it should be in that office. When you roll a patch cycle out to the Boise, Idaho office, the robot user gets the patch and you'll see its performance update just like everything else. So yes and no. We don't launch it and click buttons because I don't want the impact. Not just I mean the company, but we don't want the impact of the UI here. But we do use the core DLLs, the core functionality, and when you patch that system, we start using that patch DLL to have this happen. Our goal is to be as close to accurate on every single protocol as we possibly can.
That's actually the topic of one of the other webinar we'll have on the protocol, the impact, and we'll go more in depth on that, how we generate the different tests and what's the impact of those different protocols. Nope, none of our. So sorry, I'm half trying to read with this. There's so many questions popping through, but we were not using ISPs that were paired with Microsoft. Actually, quite the opposite, and intentionally. Down to out of our Boston office here, we have a heavily overloaded cable network with so many people in the buildings next to us. They can hear our webinar easily, I'm sure. It's incredible how variable the performance can be. We are going to do a very specific session focusing on ExpressRoute. And when we do that one, we're going to focus on more than just Outlook, because there are certainly performance gains in other protocols, other clients. So we've talked about Outlook, but we can do this with Skype for Business to the cloud, with SharePoint. However, they're not peered in this particular case. So they're just random, non-approved ISPs, if you will.
Okay. The last one here is, what about the impact on the performance caused by long folder lists and sync issues?
Yeah, so what we didn't, and we can send you a very specific data response because we actually do have this data, or we can make sure we include it in the PowerPoint. So the PowerPoint deck, we're going to put screenshots of what we've been showing and send it out, even though there aren't many slides we've worked off of. But we do have the ability to show the impact of creating folders, deleting folders, searching, and I think that will actually answer in terms of what you're looking for. Our focus today was we tried to stay largely on really network issues, I guess, network issues and what they do to the individual actions inside of Outlook. So the network issues can have a direct impact on, creating folders, searching. Searching actually has a tremendous variance. That one has some variance in terms of time of day, weekends. I mean, you'll see that one get reasonably, heavily throttled as well. But so again, we can send over data I think that will help. It's probably the easiest way, or I'll talk until people wanted to be home 3 hours ago.
Yeah, I think we're going to wrap this up now. I think we have a few more questions that we'll answer directly by email. So with that, thank you for attending today's webinar. An evaluation is going to show up in your browser, so please take the time to provide us with your feedback. That's really important to us. And thanks again, and have a great day.